Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a wild story about how a craving for something as simple as spice actually sparked a global race, completely redrew the world map, and yeah, kicked off centuries of conflict.
Okay, so let's get right to it with a big question. You've heard the words imperialism and colonialism 1,000 times, right? People often use them like they're the exact same thing. But are they?
Well, the short answer is nope, not at all. And honestly, getting the difference between them is the key to unlocking this whole chapter of world history. Think of them as a one-two punch of domination that literally shaped the world we live in today.
All right, first things first, we gotta get our terms straight. You can think of this as the basic rule book for the next 400 years of global history.
So look, here's the simplest way to break it down. Imperialism is stage one. It's all about indirect influence, kind of pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Colonialism, though, that's stage two. That's a full-on, boots-on-the-ground takeover. Imperialism might tweak the system, but colonialism, it just rips it out and builds a whole new one that benefits the colonizer. Let's try an analogy. Imperialism is kind of like you're driving your car using Google Maps. See, you're still holding the steering wheel. It feels like you're in charge. But let's be real, an outside force, Google, is telling you exactly where to turn to get to its preferred destination, which might not be what's best for you. Okay, so then what's colonialism? Well, that's when Google decides to just kick you out of the driver's seat entirely. Your car is now a self-driving vehicle. You're not driving anymore, you're just a passenger. And that car is going exactly where the colonizing power wants it to go. Your original destination is completely irrelevant now.
So, what could possibly be big enough to push Europe into this whole new world of domination? You're not going to believe it, but it really all came down to a desperate craving for pepper.
You know, for most of history, the global economy had a pretty reliable rhythm. Europe had these well-worn trade routes, like the Silk Road, that connected them to the Indian subcontinent. And India was a global economic powerhouse. We're talking top-tier cotton and, of course, spices. But then, everything changed. These two massive empires, the Ottomans and the Safavids, rose to power and basically took control of the entire Middle East. And for Christian traders from Europe, it was like a giant road closed sign was thrown up right in the middle of their most important highway. All of a sudden, getting those Indian goods became either impossible or incredibly expensive. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a full-blown economic crisis. And it sparked a burning, high-stakes question across all of Europe. The only answer they could come up with was to bypass the land routes entirely and find a new way to India by sea. And just like that, a frantic, high-stakes race began between the two nations that had the best ships and the bravest sailors. And the two main contenders were Spain and Portugal. What drove them was this powerful mix of motives people call the 3 Gs. First, God, the mission to spread Christianity. Second, glory, for their nation and for themselves. And third, gold, the promise of unbelievable wealth from spices like pepper. And pepper wasn't just a luxury, you have to remember. Before refrigerators, it was absolutely vital for preserving meat. Now, this one single decade was just mind-blowing. It changed everything. In 1488, Portugal gets its first big break when Diaz makes it around the tip of Africa. Then, just 4 years later, you have Columbus making his famous wrong turn for Spain, bumping into the Americas while looking for India. That discovery leads to a treaty in 1494. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then finally, in 1498, Portugal's Vasco da Gama wins the race. He reaches India. So that treaty in 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas, is a huge deal. Spain and Portugal, with the Pope basically acting as a referee, drew a line down the map of the world, and they agreed Spain gets to claim and exploit everything to the west of that line, and Portugal gets everything to the east. And that right there is why Spain got busy in the Americas, leaving the path to India wide open for Portugal. So with their biggest rival totally preoccupied in the New World, the Portuguese had a clear shot. They could finally grab the prize they had been chasing for decades. But you know, it wasn't a walk in the park. Even after they got around Africa, the Portuguese spent 10 years getting beaten back by the Indian Ocean's monsoon winds. They just couldn't figure them out. The only reason they finally made it was because Vasco da Gama was smart enough to hire a local expert, a pilot named Abdul Majid, who knew those waters like the back of his hand.
So when Da Gama finally arrives in Calicut, he gets a warm welcome from the local ruler. He does some pretty simple, straightforward trading, buys his pepper and other spices at the normal local price. Let's just call that the baseline, our 1x price.
But then he sails all the way back to Portugal, and that same cargo of spices sells for 60 times what he paid for it. 60! Can you even imagine that kind of profit? It sent an absolute shockwave through Europe. This was it. This was the proof that the sea route wasn't just possible, it was a gold mine. A payday that big? Well, it changes things. It changed everything. And the Portuguese attitude was about to go from friendly trader to aggressive ruler really, really fast. You can see the whole imperial playbook unfold right here. That first voyage in 98, all smiles and handshakes. But the very next one, just 2 years later, shows up demanding a total monopoly on trade. The local ruler, of course, says no. Conflict breaks out. So what do the Portuguese do? They don't just go home. They sail down the coast, find a new spot in Kochi, and build a fortress. The game wasn't about trade anymore. It was about control. And that was the point of no return. Vasco da Gama's journey didn't just open a shipping lane. It opened the floodgates for centuries of European competition, pressure, and eventually full-blown colonization of the Indian subcontinent. But the story isn't that simple. It's complex. Because while their approach was definitely exploitative, the Portuguese also kicked off this massive exchange of goods and culture. They brought things from the Americas that had never been seen in India before. Things like potatoes, tomatoes, and chili peppers. I mean, can you even imagine Indian food today without them? So the big takeaway here is that the Portuguese basically forced their way in. They set up the first European imperial base in India and proved just how insanely profitable it could be. They set the stage. But they were just the opening act, and their success left the rest of Europe with a huge, tantalizing question. Portugal just kicked the door open, so what happens when a much more powerful rival decides to walk right through it?